Bart Ehrman, after his book came out, I was on the panel about that. And there's the word that we render as angel means messenger, right? And so the question of whether Paul in saying you received me as a messenger of God, as Christ himself, means messenger in the angelic sense, or as somebody sent by God, and is not saying that, is one that I think he'd be willing to say there's at least some ambiguity there.
So technically, you and Bart obviously don't see eye to eye. When I've listened to him, how Jesus became God, or his lectures he's done, his books, he is always going to Philippians 2 and seeing that and saying, oh yeah, pre-existent, going from heaven, coming down, becoming a man. And your interpretation, I think, is similar more to what I hear James Tabor describe and others.
So there was a long sort of diatribe there. I just wanted to explain why. There was just a long explanation there of some stuff that is not really pertinent to the discussion. But if I remember correctly, is that one of the positions that Dr. Ehrman has flipped on? This idea of like Jesus being divine, and then
right. Ehrman's not, and I'm not. Like none of us are arguing that the Trinitarianism existed in Paul. Like they're not saying like they're identical. But the idea of Jesus being a pre-existent being, yes, that is Ehrman's new position. People might not realize this is another thing where McGrath is not giving context, so people might not know what McGrath is talking about here. So there's a verse in Galatians where Paul says, you received me as Christ, as an angel of God, right? And Ehrman has done an announcement. Now, Ehrman is not the first to do this. He read other people who did this, or other scholars in peer-reviewed literature who did this before him. But he checked the literature and he was convinced by this argument. And I think he should be. And in fact, I did not count on this argument myself. I was like I was like McGrath. I was like, well, it's a little ambiguous. But when I read Ehrman's explication of why what McGrath just said is not a valid argument, I was convinced. So Ehrman actually convinced me of this, that passage is evidence that Paul thought that Jesus was an angel in some sense. And I don't think that stands by itself, right? It's just one piece of evidence. You need more evidence to pull that all together, but it's stronger evidence than I had previously thought. And Ehrman has a response to, I think he's got a blog. Like I think you check on his blog. He and Hurtado got in on this a lot. And now Hurtado actually agrees with the pre-existent being thing. He just doesn't like the word angel. So they're arguing about, does the word angel apply? And so Hurtado doesn't like this passage because it would allow that he's false. So because Paul's calling Christ an angel. Christ can't be called an angel. That just can't be. Even though he's a pre-existent being, he's not an angel. He's some other thing we don't have a word for apparently. So they argued about this. And so this McGrath's argument came up in that argument. And so you can find on Ehrman's blog, you can find his article on this, one or two, actually, it might be more than one. I find Ehrman's arguments completely convincing on this, like his grammatical point and all of that. And like I said, he didn't come up with these things himself, but he's right to be convinced by them. And I'm not exactly sure where he got them. So it's possible it was in some of the works that I looked at and I just overlooked it. But he's the best articulator of it. He makes it very clear and cuts it down to the simple, just the core facts of the grammar, what's going on. And he makes it very clear. And so it's a really good argument. So I actually agree with Ehrman on that. And that's what McGrath is talking about. And he's just saying he's not convinced by that. But of course, the whole argument doesn't hinge on this one passage, right? There's a lot of other evidence for this. And then there's also the question is, where is McGrath? Is he with Hurtado? And he agrees that Jesus was a pre-existent being, but he just wasn't called an angel. Like, is it a semantic argument? Or is McGrath with like Dunn, who's like trying to reinterpret everything so that, no, it's not a pre-existent being. It's pre-existent being. It's something else. It's some sort of metaphor or something. And like Jesus was an idea in the mind of God or something like that. So it's not clear which position McGrath says, because I think McGrath is answering the question and he's not being conscious of the fact that the audience doesn't know the context of anything he's talking about. I do that sometimes too, so I can't overly criticize him for that. But that, because that's going on, I think some of the audience here right now might not know what he's talking about, but that's what he's talking about. And it's that grammatical debate about what does the grammar mean of that one passage in Galatians where Paul seems to call Jesus an angel. And McGrath's position is that he's just saying a messenger of God. He's not saying an actual angel.
Yeah. So on the one hand, if I had to come down, and I recognize there's ambiguity, and I will confess that I'm uncertain and open to being convinced, and not even so much open to being convinced, it's just really not certain, right? There's some ambiguity there at the beginning. But I'm admittedly influenced by my mentor, James Dunn, wrote his Christology in the Making and made a strong case for the Adam background. And I definitely think that's there, regardless of whether there's a pre-existent status at the beginning. There's certainly room for instance, a pre-existent Messiah in Judaism. And so pre-existence doesn't mean divinity. And it can, right? The two can go hand in hand, but they don't have to. And so I think the question of whether there's pre-existence language needs to be separated from the question of whether Jesus is an angelic or divine figure. The status that Jesus is exalted to at the end is not the status he had at the beginning. That's right. Therefore, because he was obedient, God super exalted him, hyper exalted him, gave him the name which he didn't have before, that is above every name. So bestows on him the divine name, so that then he essentially becomes the means to sort of divine universal rule, right, as this exalted figure who's been installed above all these other powers. And so I think that's the key thing, is that whatever the starting point is, and whether or not it involves pre-existence, this is the story of a person who is being compared and contrasted with Adam, obeys where Adam disobeyed, and so where Adam loses his in the image and likeness of God status with everything that came with it, at least to some extent, Jesus supposedly, in Paul's theology, gets that back by being obedient.
So,
what do you think about that entire? I noticed you nodding.
Yeah, there was a bunch of things in there. Oh man, so 3 things. He ended with the Adam.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, you can tell me to stop at whatever single.
Yeah. I was going to, but I wanted to hear him complete his thoughts, but he didn't go where I wanted to know. So, for example, when he said that he was assigned the name above all names, I was hoping he would tell me what he thinks that name is. That would have been interesting. I want to know what McGrath thinks that name is, because there's a debate about this. Like, was the name Jesus, for example? Is that the name above all names? And this seems to be the case in later Christian literature, where it's the name of Jesus that is the name that scares all the demons and makes exorcism work, for example. So it suggests that he wasn't named Jesus in life, that Jesus is a name that was assigned to him after his resurrection. Now, that doesn't tell you whether he existed or not, because it could have been, Joe Blow, could have been Matthias and gets killed, and then now you're Jesus because, etc. Like that's totally compatible with historicity. But I would be curious to know what McGrath thinks the name above all names is. I waffle on this. Like, it looks like it's Jesus. Like when you read the text, it's like, is it Jesus? It looks like they're talking about Jesus being the name above all names. But I don't know for sure, because you could say, well, is it the Lord? Is the Lord the name above all names? Is it a secret name that we're not being told? So I'm not entirely sure on that one. I kind of lean towards it's Jesus, but it's not strong enough for me to say that that's what's going on there. So that's an example. I was waiting for him to finish that sentence, and he didn't. So I didn't want to interrupt. But he went on to talk about a bunch of other things. 2 other things. One thing before that and one thing after that. The thing before that is he says that whether Jesus was a pre-existent being is a different question from whether he was divine, which is a different question from whether that's an angel. All 3 of these things are different things. So angel doesn't necessarily mean divine. It depends on what your definition of divine is. Pre-existent, this is the Hurtado argument. He's a pre-existent divine being, but he's not called an angel. That's offensive or something or whatever. So that's a semantic argument. And again, McGrath didn't parse that, so I don't know where he lands on that. He seems to say that he's not sure, right? He's saying, like, I don't know, like there's these different questions. I don't know how to answer them, which is a fair answer, right? But I agree with him that these are 3 completely different things, and it depends on semantics. Like, how are you defining these words? What do you mean when you say that Jesus can't be called an angel? What is that, like? Why? Based on what? What definition are you giving of angel that it doesn't apply, etc.? So there's a lot of different arguments you can spin on that, and McGrath didn't take a position, so there's nothing really to respond to on that. And then there's the other half, which is the Adam comparison. It seemed like to me that McGrath thinks that Philippians 2 is comparing Jesus to Adam, and I think that's false. I think it's more obvious that Jesus is compared to Satan. right? Jesus is reversing Satan. Now, he's not reversing Adam. He's reversing Satan, because when you look at Philippians 2, verse 5, for instance, it's like he didn't claim equality to God. He submitted, right? That is a direct reference to Satan, who claimed that he's as good as God, causing the war in heaven, and then Satan and his legion of angels are cast down. And that caused death and every other evil thing in Second Temple theology. That was all caused by Satan trying to claim the status of God. Jesus does the opposite. He's just as powerful as Satan. He could try to do what Satan did, but no, he does the opposite. He humbles himself. He gives up all the supernatural powers, becomes mortal, and then gets killed, and then he gets exalted because he obeyed. So he obeyed. He went down and obeyed. Satan disobeyed and was cast down, right? So like he's undoing the story of Satan. So I think it's Satan, not Adam. Adam didn't try to pretend that he was God. Like that's not in the story. Adam just like fucked up because he was a dumbass, right? Like there's no like I'm equal to God, right? No, he just made a mistake and then God punished him for it. Right? There's nothing about Adam trying to claim equality to God. Only Satan does that. And that is a Second Temple teaching that is not in the Bible. You won't find that in the Old Testament that we have now. It was in Jewish scriptures, but not the ones that ended up in our Old Testament. So but I understand where he thinks like Jesus is reversing Adam. Like there are legitimate ways to think that would be a metaphor that people would use. So I'm not going to criticize McGrath too much on that. But the only reason I disagree with that is because I think when you analyze the passage, it's very clearly referring to Satan. Jesus is reversing Satan, not Adam. That's connected to Adam in Second Temple theology. Adam, they connected to the serpent, etc. That was not the case in the Old Testament. That's a later development. The idea that they're the same is a different thing. But anyway, those are the only three things that McGrath said. I didn't find them like laughable. They're so
no. The laughable parts, I believe, still to come, or the really laughable part.
Oh dear. Okay,
comes in a different video. He's just got a couple more minutes to go. I may have been wrong as to when the laughable part happens. So
let's find out.
Yes or no question. Really simple. Could you be wrong?
Yes.
Okay. I just want to ask because sometimes it's good to let our audience follow us, right? So
I'll say, can I go even further? I don't know about what. For sure. And when I'm wrong and persuaded of that, I try to change my mind. But pretty much guarantee that as a human being and even as an expert in certain areas, I'm wrong. Right? Because people that I respect hold different viewpoints. And the odds are that some of them are right about some of the things that I and they disagree on. Right? And so that's one of the things that I think in an ideal world, not always in practice, distinguishes scholarship from kind of internet apologetics.
Right.
Is that ideally, we're searching for truth and we are trying to get closer to it, and we're fallible. And that's why we need this community of people who are going to challenge our ideas. Sorry for taking that one word answer. And
that's a great answer. I really like that. I'll do it in Bayesian terms. Like if I am 99% certain of something, that means there's a 1% chance I'm wrong, which means of all those beliefs that I'm that confident in, 1 out of every 100 of them, I have to be wrong and not know it. So I know I've got to be wrong by about at least 1% of the things that I believe. And some things less, because some things I'm more confident in than 99%, but other things I'm less confident. So when I do the top margin of my margin of error on the historicity of Jesus, I give 33%, right? It's a 1 in 3 chance I'm wrong. Like I'm admitting to a lot of possibility of being wrong in that. And even on the bottom margin of my error, when I'm 1 in 12,000, still 1 in 12,000. Like there's a chance I'm wrong. It's just I'm less likely. If that's the probability, then it's very unlikely that I'm wrong. It's possible. And in fact, that means 1 out of every 12,000 things that I have that much evidence for, I'm wrong about. And so that has to be a fact. And so the goal there, because that's a fact, your goal should always be self-monitoring, always checking, right? Like, always like wanting to listen to like a sincere, non-disingenuous argument against what you're thinking, because they could be right. And that's the only way. That's how I ended up a mythicist, right? It's like I was an adamant like historicist making fun of mythicists until I checked, right? I spent 6 years checking it. And I could count it like before that when I looked at Earl Doherty's book, and I wasn't completely convinced, but I realized like he had a decent argument and I didn't think that was even possible. That started my change, right? It's like when I realized that you could actually make a decent argument against the historicity of Jesus, which I didn't think was possible. That changed. I realized I was wrong all the time. Same thing happened with Q. I used to be like a Q, of course. until I checked the facts for Q, and I was like, oh my God, these arguments are terrible. The evidence, there's tons of evidence against it. Like there's no basis for Q. That was a transformation. I was on the other side of that. I was on the other side of like, Mark is like a terrible writer, or he writes like a hick. And then I studied Mark and realized, no, he's a freaking genius. And he knows he's writing in a low dialect on purpose, right? Like it's like Mark Twain. He's doing this on purpose. That was a flip. So it's like, you can be wrong about tons of things, and it really does hinge on whether you've checked or not. Like that makes a big difference as to whether the probability that you're going to be right or wrong about something.
Yeah, no, I agree. And that actually wasn't the funny part that I was thinking about. I
didn't think it was. Yeah, no, right.
It's definitely it's definitely in the second video, and maybe we'll be able to get to that. But so that was the end of his responses, a very basic sort of response to it. And like you pointed out, it's the Hurtado argument against the Philo's angel kind of thing. But next we've got Chrissy Hansen, who got a super chat to explain why you're wrong about Philo's archangel.
Nice.
For some reason, like this has been across the spectrum
lately.
of like
right.
people.
It's been weird. Right.
Yeah.